Welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be looking at a historical adventure action anime called Vinland Saga. It is a beautiful day in a field, and a man named Thors is called by a woman named Helga who is holding a baby. But this idyllic scene is shattered when Thors realizes he is on a ship, surrounded by corpses, in the midst of a battle. He is aided by his friend 𝐾𝐿, and together they devise a plan to defeat their enemy when 𝐔𝐾𝐒 approaches. Thor engages in combat and is injured by an arrow and falls off ship, but ultimately emerges victorious and swims to shore. There, he leaves the fight and the burning ships behind. I'd straight up leave a life like that too. Years later in Iceland, Thor Snorrason lives with his son Thorfinn, his daughter Ylva and his wife, Helga. At night, children gather around a man named Leif Erikson to hear his stories about a new warm paradise called Vinland. The children end up staying late before they are led by a boy named Ari back home. This is when a mysterious man with chains is seen coming to the village. Thors and Leif discuss about the harsh cold weather of Greenland and the tough life in Iceland. Leif tells Thor about his brother, Thorvald, who plans to leave Greenland. The next morning, Thors and Ylva are cleaning the snow off the roof when she suddenly falls off. She's unharmed, but feels something under the snow, so she digs to find the mysterious man in chains from earlier. Later on, as Leif is working on his ship, Thorfinn inquires about the truth of his stories and that he should take him on a journey. Leif tells him a story about how he got his 6 companions killed because of carelessness in the ocean. While Thors brings the man back home to try to revive him, Leif tells Thorfinn the story about their ancestors, who fled from the tyrant king, Harald. Thorfinn refuses to believe that their ancestors ran before running home himself. Seems like running away is an inherited trait, isn't it? Eventually, the man wakes up and reveals that he is a slave who belongs to Halfdan. Suddenly, a man arrives and says that Halfdan has arrived on a shore in a confrontation. After a brutal display of respect for the law, Halfdan asks where his slave is. Meanwhile, the slave is nearly half dead when Halfdan walks into the Thors family home. They need the slave as a reminder to other slaves, but Thors decides to buy the slave instead for 8 ewes. Later that night, Thors digs a grave for the slave, who died regardless. As Ylva cries about this loss, Thorfinn confirms the story about his ancestors with Thors, and 𝐔𝐾𝐒 gets ready to set sail to Iceland. On November 13, 1002, the Vikings of a village bath on their customary day of Saga. It seems the English are aware of this and use it as an element of surprise to attack. They kill everyone, leaving not even women and children alive. Meanwhile in Iceland, Thorfinn and 𝐔𝐶 pretend battle until Leif arrives. Leif takes them to his ship and reveals that he is leaving tomorrow to Norway for trade, while Thors learns blacksmithing at a workshop, albeit terribly, as he can barely fix a hole in a pot. A group of soldiers land on the shore demanding to speak with Thors the troll. As Thors and Thorfinn arrive, the soldiers are revealed to be 𝐿𝐔𝐽𝐿, led by 𝐔𝐾𝐒, who asks for permission to land. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 has come back to give him the message that Chief Sigvaldi has ordered the entire fleet to return to Jomsburg to join Denmark in the war against England. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 won't go empty-handed, and essentially suggests holding the entire village as hostage, so Thors is forced to fight again as a 𝐿𝐔𝐽𝐿's captain and discusses his past with Helga and Leif. Thors also decides to take Leif with him, since his route will be much safer that way. During training, Thorfinn easily defeats his opponents, but goes too far and angrily beats up some of them. He sees all the boys with weapons from afar, and everyone's a little too excited to go to literal war. He goes to find his own weapon and finds his father's old dagger, before his father takes the dagger from him. Thorfinn injures his hands in the process, but Thors tries to tell him that killing is not the answer he is looking for. As Thors prepares to leave, he asks Helga to look after Thorfinn. The next morning, Thors and Leif set sail. Meanwhile, at Streymoy of the Faroe Islands, 𝐔𝐾𝐒 talks with a man named Askeladd who has his own group of men. He offers Askeladd 100 coins and the cargo of the ship of his mark. This is where 𝐔𝐾𝐒 reveals that he wants Thors assassinated. Awful lot of effort convincing him just to have him killed. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 claims that the punishment for a deserter is death, and the 𝐿𝐔𝐽𝐿 want him dead according to law. However, Askeladd sees through the bluff and asks him to double the payment, which 𝐔𝐾𝐒 accepts. In the meantime, the village is excited for wartime and the men prepare themselves for battle. Thor will take 5 men and Leif Erikson's crew with him to England. Little do they know, as Leif reveals to a woman to comfort her fears about Ari dying, that Thors won't take them into battle with him. Instead, Thors plans to leave them behind in Norway with Leif's crew, as he doesn't want the village blood on his hands. Leif can ferry back 5 people to Iceland, so there is no issue of safety. As they set sail, Thors discovers Thorfinn has snuck aboard the ship. He scolds his son for this behavior, but there is no other choice, as they can't turn back now. Meanwhile, Askeladd discusses plans with his fighter, Bjorn, about the true motives of 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and what he's really hiding. It is possible that 𝐔𝐾𝐒 wanted to settle a personal grudge with Thors. Ari and Thors have a discussion about Ylva, and Ari confesses the love he has for Thor's daughter. Never a better time than wartime. Thors is reminded about her birth, and that how at first he was mad as the chief wanted a boy, but over time the birth of 𝐕𝐈 led to Thor's distaste for fighting itself. As the ship approaches the Faroe Islands, they plan to rest, but something feels off to Leif. It is too late, as 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD's men already planned an attack and trapped the ship in the inlet. Thor gives his dagger to Thorfinn for self-defense. Just in case, 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD's henchman, Bjorn, takes a mushroom and is with his comrades on a boat, which is boarded by Thor's alone. He single-handedly incapacitates everyone besides Bjorn, surprising him. Thor keeps pushing on and defeats most of 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD's men. However, he never killed one, in fact even directly saving one by lending him an oar to float on. This sends Bjorn into a berserker rage due to the mushrooms and heads towards Thors, who knocks him out with no issue. New UFC champion. Bjorn, despite being injured, stands up but is defeated again and falls into the water. Thors then addresses 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD as the leader of the pirates and calls him to a duel where if Thors wins, the pirates leave immediately, and if 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD wins, they do as they please. Despite a sneak attack leaving a shallow cut, Thors simply outmatched 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD in battle and asks him to surrender. He refuses, instead asking about how he is so strong. Thors knows that if 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD doesn't surrender, there is no one to protect the others if he engages in battle, so he has to resort to other methods. Eventually, Bjorn comes in and holds Thorfinn hostage, breaking the rules of the duel, giving the victory to Thors. Technically, it's a win, so it counts. 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD admits defeat right before he allows the signal for archers to fire on Thors. As he dies, the Troll of Jom asks 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD to honor his word, which he agrees. He also tells Leif to send his head to the Jomsvikings chief, Sigvaldi, so the village isn't punished for his desertion. Thorfinn cries out as his father takes his final breaths. Still standing, 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD's crew has taken Thor's warships in tow, but they did not know that Thorfinn was stowed away with them. He confronts the crew, telling them that he will have his revenge, but 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD tells his men to ignore Thorfinn. Thorfinn wakes up on the ship, hungry and thirsty. As 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD dock their ship, Thorfinn follows them quietly but stumbles and falls unconscious. When he wakes up, it is night, and he is extremely thirsty. Thankfully for him, he finds a pond and drinks but sees a large fire in the distance. He witnesses 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD's crew raid and butchers a village for supplies and waits until they fall asleep. He sneaks into the camp and finds 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD sleeping, but due to his honor as a warrior inherited by his father, he can't kill a defenseless enemy. He leaves, but it turns out 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD was awake the entire time. The next morning, Thorfinn challenges 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD to a duel but gets his sword stuck because of his horrendous sword swinging, and 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD kicks him and leaves. Later, the pirate collects his payment for killing Thors. At the village, Leif and the crew deliver the news of Thor's death to Helga and 𝐕𝐈, and also tell them about Thorfinn being lost. 𝐕𝐈 seems unfazed and later on distracts herself with work around the village, leaving everyone stunned by her strength and fortitude. However, in a rare moment of tenderness, she finds herself crying and is comforted by her mother. In the forest, Thorfinn learns to survive for himself and is one day encountered by Bjorn, who blocks his attack and leaves him. He tells 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD about this encounter, and meanwhile Thorfinn learns to get used to his sword and dagger. One morning, he challenges 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD to a duel, which he reluctantly accepts. Didn't learn the first time, huh? 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD easily overpowers Thorfinn until he is surprised by a dagger throw, which makes him respect the son of Thors. The pirate makes a promise on his ancestors to reward Thorfinn with a duel if he achieves something great in battle. 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD and his crew arrive at Gainsborough shore, where they see signs of a struggle with many corpses, giving Thorfinn a glimpse of the harsh reality of war. At night, the Danes come to negotiate with 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD, and they reach a deal but are hit with a surprise attack. In a tense battle between the crew and their attackers, Thorfinn gets his first brutal kill. Everyone has their first time right. Over time, Thorfinn becomes skilled with 2 daggers and accumulates a very high body count, and becomes a soldier of 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD throughout his raids. After some time passes, he is given a scouting mission by 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD which he reluctantly accepts, but is injured by an arrow. He is found by a woman and her daughter, who nurse him back to health. An English soldier arrives at their house asking for Thorfinn, but the woman decides to hide him. It turns out the woman had a son named John who died, and Thorfinn resembled him a lot. Was Thorfinn a replacement duty? Who knows? After he had healed from his wounds, Thorfinn decides to warn the women by telling them to run. He lights a house on fire, signaling 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD and his men to raid the village. As he kills 3 English soldiers by himself, the woman who cared for him watches in shock and sadness. The realization that she couldn't save him like her son, and Thorfinn's realization that he will never be the same innocent boy ever again. 5 years later, the Danish king makes the decision to withdraw his troops and let them rest for the winter. 𝐔𝐽𝐿aD and his band, now temporarily unemployed and in need of money before the winter starts, venture to France. The French are fighting amongst themselves, and they witness a fortress under attack. The strategies employed by the attackers are absolutely awful, and they suffer heavy losses and have to retreat. This was the worst mounted attack you could probably ever see. Here, a now 16-year-old Thorfinn is sent to negotiate with the leader of the attackers. Thorfinn is reluctant and says that he has done more than enough to warrant his hard-earned duel. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 promises him that if he brings back the head of the leader of the fort, the pirate will duel him. Thorfinn goes to negotiate with the attacker's leader, who is named 𝐔𝐵𝐻. This has to be a Jabba the Hutt reference because he certainly looks the part. After a little convincing, they agree on the deal that the Vikings will take half of the spoils of the fortress. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his crew devise a plan and attack through the lake instead of the main gate, and they are highly successful. Meanwhile, Thorfinn climbs the walls using his daggers and beheads the leader of the fortress with ease. The fort has been conquered, and the attackers go to take the treasure but find the room empty. It turns out that 𝐔𝐾𝐒 has taken the treasure, and the other half of the spoils are the spoils of victory given to the attackers. 𝐔𝐵𝐻 is furious and launches an unsuccessful arrow barrage on the Viking ship. This barrage interrupts the duel that 𝐔𝐾𝐒 was supposed to have with Thorfinn, and they delay it for another time. After getting all the money they needed for the winter, 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his band go back to their village, Jutland. They plan to rest here for the season, until the Danish invasion commences. Here, Thorfinn and 𝐔𝐾𝐒 finally have their duel. At first, Thorfinn's skills and speed makes him have the upper hand, but 𝐔𝐾𝐒 taunts him about his father. The classic mocking the family to set someone off technique. This causes Thorfinn to rage and attack mindlessly, and end up losing the duel. Because of this, 𝐔𝐾𝐒 still spares him, and they have a feast at night while Thorfinn stays on the ship outside. He has a vision with his father reminding him that no one has enemies, and a true warrior never needs a sword. He is visited by a slave girl who delivers him food, and Thorfinn asks him why doesn't she kill her master and free herself. She says that there is nowhere free to go, and everywhere is plagued by war and slavery. In a rare moment of compassion and hope for Thorfinn, despite being a brooding person, he tells her about the concept of Vinland. A year later, the Danish invasion finally commences with King Sweyn sending the order that his son, Prince Canute, must participate, despite his lack of experience in battle. The invasion is going well until it comes to a halt at London, where the forces can't seem to progress. It turns out 𝐶𝐾𝐒 himself is on the side of the English, and he is single-handedly responsible for halting the Danish forces. The Danish forces, including 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his band, are situated in London, where they face 𝐶𝐾𝐒 the Tall. The attack on London is at a standstill because of 𝐶𝐾𝐒. That is why 𝐔𝐾𝐒 gives a new assignment to Thorfinn. He is to kill 𝐶𝐾𝐒, with the promise with the same thing, more duels. Later on, 𝐔𝐾𝐒 arrives as a messenger to try to convince 𝐶𝐾𝐒 to join the Danes, and the Tall agrees that the English are weak. But he also says that it is more fun to fight a losing battle than one that's easily won. So he rejects all offers of money and continues to fight on the side of the English. His back must hurt from carrying England at this point. Hearing this, King Sweyn orders the attack immediately and the soldiers begin their advance. Thorfinn uses this as an opportunity to attack, and 𝐶𝐾𝐒 can sense his warrior spirit, so he duels him alone. In a hard-fought battle, Thorfinn gets his shoulder dislocated and is injured. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 sees the one-sided duel and retreats, but the duel is not over yet. Thorfinn, still alive, manages to cut off 2 fingers of 𝐶𝐾𝐒, garnering his immense respect. He asks him his name, and this is where Thorfinn introduces himself as the son of Thors. Before the tall pirate could inquire further, he swims away, and 𝐶𝐾𝐒 lets him go, lamenting that it was a well-fought duel between warriors. After their retreat, King Sweyn decides to have the army march west instead, and leaves a group of 4,000 men to his son Canute to siege London. Ragnar, Canute's guardian, objects, saying that Canute is inexperienced and not ready. The king says that he needs to experience war to strengthen himself, otherwise he will remain sheltered his entire life. As 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his crew march to Wessex, they are joined by Thorfinn, who is still injured, and laments why anyone would enjoy battle like 𝐶𝐾𝐒 does. Maybe if Thorfinn actually won some duels, he'd enjoy battle too. The 4,000 soldiers left with Canute are growing restless. There has been no plan of action, and even 𝐶𝐾𝐒 is bored. He throws rocks at their base, begging them to attack already, but to no avail. The men start ridiculing Canute, calling him a coward, but Ragnar consoles him that they'll be asked to retreat in the winter anyway. Seems like a long excuse to escape war. Meanwhile, 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his crew raid another village. Here, Thorfinn has a dream about Vinland and his father and wakes up, unsettled and disconcerted. It seems that despite his new dark nature, he still misses his family dearly. He wanders off alone, eventually meeting 𝐔𝐾𝐒 at the top of the hill. He clarifies to 𝐔𝐾𝐒 that he isn't a friend and hasn't forgotten the original reason he joined 𝐔𝐾𝐒's crew. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 tells him that one day the famed pirate will lose the duel eventually, as all strong men eventually lose. As 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and Thorfinn watch the sunrise, a lone man on a horse approaches, bringing news that Thorkel and his men have brutally defeated Canute's 4,000 men and are now marching toward the main forces to fight them. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 gets an ingenious idea and has the messenger killed to stop this news from spreading. He decides to rescue Canute, and since he is valuable to both the Danish and the English, the highest bidder gets the prince. Supply and demand in the age of the Vikings. This idea excites him, but he is asked how he'll fight Thorkel the Tall. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 laments that it doesn't matter, since the idea is to go out with a bang. As the autumn breeze blew through the air, Thorkel and his men spoke of the season and talked about Christianity, comparing it with their own gods. They talk and ask Canute and the priest with them about which god is stronger. The priest, all out of alcohol, says whichever one made booze. This conversation was interrupted as Thorkel senses a group of soldiers. Canute's men confront the Thorkel, demanding the return of Ragnar and Canute. Thorkel returns them to the soldiers, but expects them to fight back. He mocks them, saying that they have no excuse to retreat, and if they do, they are cowards. Ragnar tries to defuse the situation but to no avail, and the soldiers start their attack. In the meantime, 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his men start fires on the battlefield. Thorkel realizes that the fire was started by a third party and orders his men to extinguish it. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 sends Thorfinn to capture the prince. As Ragnar and Canute are confronted in the smoke by Thorkel, Thorfinn arrives just in time by distracting them with a burning horse. Thorkel recognizes Thorfinn and asks him questions that he couldn't ask earlier. It is revealed to Thorfinn that Thorkel knew Thor's and considers him the only man stronger than him. Out of respect, he lets the prince go with Thorfinn and hopes that they will meet again. Since this is an anime, they obviously will. Thorfinn returns with the prince, and 𝐔𝐾𝐒 becomes the protector of Canute, asking to unmask him so he can see his face. Canute takes his mask off, revealing a very androgynous-looking man. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his men proceed to march tirelessly towards the main army. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 meets a ferry operator to deliver a letter to an elder. Meanwhile, Thorkel's men continue to pursue 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his men. One of 𝐔𝐾𝐒's men, known as the Ear, who has big ears, much to anyone's surprise has the ability to detect their presence by hearing the soldiers and their horses. He determines that they are only one day behind on foot and also detects two men on horseback. Realizing that they cannot win in a fight, 𝐔𝐾𝐒 decides they must keep running until the reinforcements he has sent for arrive. They arrive in the form of a Welsh commander and his ship. They escape Thorkel's pursuit by crossing the river and going to Wales, where they decide to march through the country. Ragnar protests, saying that Wales hates them, but 𝐔𝐾𝐒 says that Wales is an ally and they can make a deal. Thorfinn is asked to escort the prince with another promise of a duel with 𝐔𝐾𝐒. A Welsh commander disregards the prince, saying he lacks the fortitude to become the next king of England and lead. He explains that the only reason he's allowing them to stay in Wales is because they wish to have a non-aggression pact with England in the future. The prince does not respond, only whispering to Ragnar to answer for him, further solidifying the commander's opinion on him. 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his men begin their march across Wales. On the way, the Christian priest with Canute tries to explain the concept of love to the Vikings, but they don't seem to understand. Neither can most of the people in today's world really. They continue to march, but they are stopped by archers on the hills, with their arrows aimed at 𝐔𝐾𝐒 and his men. If you liked the video, like and subscribe to the channel.